Hey everybody, we are Martin, Robert, and Francis, and this is Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Get ready, we're about to live in your head rent-free. Hey everybody, welcome back to Snakes and Otters. I am Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis.
Today is episode 57, pop culture episode, and we are talking Westerns, a truly American art form. So we're going to talk about the Western as to me, it's the American epic story. You can do Roman epic movies and shows. You can do European history epics, and America doesn't have a very long history, but this is our history epic, the Western. So guys, I'm going to throw a few of my favorites, or our favorites, out. The movies, the shows, and some of the stars and the drivers, and just kick us off with a little bit of that, and let you all kind of take off with it, all right?
Sure.
So we're coming up, of course, listeners, we're also coming off last week, our John Wayne episode. So, of course, I want to start with one of his, El Dorado, my favorite, Jimmy Caan, Robert Mitchum. Then The Shootist, love The Shootist, John Wayne's final film.
Mm-hmm.
The Outlaw Josie Wales, Clint Eastwood.
Clint Eastwood considered it his greatest role as a Western.
It is an awesome film.
Yeah.
I like to say that I believe in the Josie Wales 10 Bears School of Diplomacy from the great meeting scene.
Oh, absolutely. It's fantastic. Nothing happens except a lot of badassery in dialogue. I mean, it's so amazingly well written.
Yeah. I'm not promising you nothing extra. I'm saying we can live together without killing each other.
That's right.
We
could probably quote the whole scene, boys and girls, but we're not going to do that, even though we are sorely tempted to, because it is one of those great moments. Yes.
Yeah, I love Josie Wales and 10 Bears. Of course, all three of the Clint Eastwood spaghetti westerns, Fistful of Dollars for a few dollars more, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Chisholm, Big Jake, and The Magnificent Seven. Love that one.
Yes.
Will Penny, a Chuck Heston Western. Not a big action movie, but a great story.
Yeah, he said it was one of his favorite movies. Charlton Heston did. It's a great movie. You're right. It's slower. People that are action oriented are going to necessarily think, "What is this?" But it's still a great movie.
That's a good one.
Kind of a real human story, a personalized kind of Western story.
Yeah.
Major Dundee, another Chuck.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little later, some of the, Tombstone, of course, is one of those movies all three of us quote and love.
Oh, absolutely.
Every time we play cards, we have to go, 500 must be a peach of a hand.
Oh, yes, that movie's been quoted 1,000 million times.
People we play cards with want to punch us.
Well,
we can keep
to be fair, it's Val Kilmer in that. Doc Holliday we're quoting more so than anything else.
This is true. This is true. I don't know. You Tell 'Em I'm Coming by Kurt Russell. It's pretty good stuff. That's right.
That's true. That is one of my all-time favorite movie quotes. You Tell 'Em I'm Coming and Hell's Coming
with me. That's right.
Yeah. And then, of course, Silverado. We love Silverado. It's a little bit different.
You're taking all my movies.
Not a gritty one, but fun, just fun all the way through.
Kevin Costner in that movie is phenomenal.
Yeah, it proved that westerns could be done at a time where they didn't think they would ever make any, and they made this when it came out of nowhere. They said, "Wow, this was a good movie and it did well, and it's a western." And
a lot of people who were moderately famous, not super superstars, but names. And some that were on their way to become names.
Yeah.
And
Danny Glover's performance was terrific in that one.
Yep. Patricia Arquette is in that.
Yeah, and we just lost Brian Dennehy.
Oh, that's
was
right.
so
I
great
forgot
as
he was in
Cobb.
that. Yes, he was very good.
So great as Cobb. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, we talked about those movies, and you guys had a bunch of the shows too. Of course, talk about Lonesome Dove. I know Francis loves Lonesome Dove.
Oh yeah, it's to me. I consider that to be the greatest Western ever done, and it's been said by many. It was originally written to be a John Wayne, Jimmy Stewart, and Henry Fonda vehicle by Larry McMurtry. It was a screenplay, and the other two guys were on, but Wayne passed because it was meant to be like McMurtry calls it. It's meant to be the bringing down the curtain on the Western story in the early '70s. It's one of the reasons Wayne passed on it. He didn't think it was over yet, and he's probably right. But he made the right decision because, A, McMurtry turns it into a novel, wins the Pulitzer Prize. It's still one of the greatest journey stories you'll ever have. And I can tell you for a fact, it is a metaphor for the New Testament, boys and girls. Augustus McCrae is the Christ figure. Woodrow Call is the St. Peter figure. Jake Spoon is the Judas figure. I can go on and on this, but nevertheless, it is a fantastically human story, and I think at its core, that's so much why Westerns, we like them so much. It's not just that they're American stories; they are that. But there has to be more to it than that. And I think this is not the story of kings and cardinals, as they say. This is a story of ordinary folks doing ordinary things extraordinarily. And that resonates with people. It always has.
Yeah. And that's a key part of them is it's a frontier thing. It's people making a life out of a place that's pretty tough to make one in. So that it does
and holding
make
on
it
to
very
humanity
different from
along the way.
Yeah,
because it's very white hat, black hat most of the time. It's very hero versus villain. It's animal man versus civilized man in many ways, and that's a story we can always get behind. We love, we Americans really love justice. We love to see justice done, and most Westerns have that as some form of meta theme for them. Every once in a while it's subverted, but as a general rule, we kind of come back to that a lot. Unforgiven's one that subverts that, but most of the others stay with it.
Really? I don't think so, because I think that's the whole point of the movie, is justice.
It is, but how it, in the search for justice, Bonnie is corrupted. He is brought back to his evil ways in order to seek justice. That's why I say it was a subversion. Whereas Pale Rider, which was Eastwood's Western just before that, is the straight justice story. Supposedly the gunfighter, who may or may not be a ghost, a theme that Eastwood had done before, comes back to wipe out the injustice, literally in this case, which is very similar to, Martin, one of your favorite movies of his, ours too, High Plains Drifter. Fantastic, fantastic movie.
Yeah, I want to talk about High
very
Plains
different.
Drifter in a little bit, So some of the other big stars of Westerns that I really love to watch act, Eli Wallach played Tuco in Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and
Even if he never did another movie, that was enough. It was amazing.
Oh, he was awesome.
Yes.
Yeah. If you have to shoot, don't talk.
That's right. It's an amazing. He had an amazing career, not just that movie, but that's the one we tend to remember him the most for.
Yeah, he's
Eli
so
Wallach
awesome
in the role of Tuco,
and so great as Calvada in The Magnificent Seven. You came back, a man like you, for a place like this. It was just great lines, great delivery. We already talked about Chuck, Steve McQueen. Love Steve McQueen in Westerns.
Yep.
Of course, the two giant figures of Westerns are the Duke and Clint Eastwood.
Right.
But directors, Sam Peckinpah, John Ford, Howard Hawks.
Oh my goodness, John Ford! We could do a whole episode on him because he did so much of the Western genre. We owe to him because he did it well. He told those stories well. I mean, he knew the right actors. Don't get me wrong, but it was more than that. And in the film genre, you got to get that right. And it wasn't just the writing; it was the directing. Ford deserves a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, he is certainly one of the. He's probably the giant of the Western directors. Howard Hawks is known for a lot of other things besides his Westerns, but John Ford, that's his mate. It sounds like it's belittling it, but it's a massive thing when you're known as the Western director.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah. So
because they were great storytellers. I mean, that's what made them great directors.
That's exactly it. That's ultimately what that is. And there were many other great directors. Don't get us wrong, but something about Ford's easy way of making the story come alive on the screen. That's just talent. That's just the way that goes.
So, guys, what is the Western? I've described it as America's historical film, historical epic, but there are certain pieces that have to be there for it to be a Western. And like we talked about a little in show prep, sometimes those things even get translated, those same elements get translated into settings that aren't the American West, and they feel like a Western. The Walking Dead feels like a Western, even though it's a zombie show.
Well, Outland with Sean Connery was a remake of High Noon on a moon of Io. And it's a damn good movie.
I know that's a movie that hardly anybody knows, and I love Outland.
Let me give you my favorite quote from it, because it's probably yours too. You better do what I say, or I'm going to have to kick your nasty ass all up and down this hallway. That's one of those movies you go, what?
Kick your nasty ass all over this room.
That's exactly right. It was great, fantastic.
Frances Sternhagen, she's awesome.
So a Western, it's got some, the technical definition obviously is fairly precise. It's generally considered the latter half of the 19th century, basically post-Civil War.
A story set on the American frontier post the Civil War.
Yeah, right. Basically up through the late 1800s. Once you get into 1900, the Western really doesn't seem right to call that a Western.
You get a few. Actually, Big Jake takes place in 1909, but it's designed to show that the West is waning and the New World is here. So it's the kind of
the car is here.
Yeah, once Arizona becomes a state, the Western age is definitely over. But it's not just the setting that makes it qualify. We've talked about this in the John Wayne, at least to me. Talked about this with the John Wayne episode, and we talked about it in the show prep. And to me, what makes the Western a Western is it's that hero's journey bit, where you've got somebody who is up against overwhelming odds, and they prevail. I don't want to belittle this when I say this, but the accidents, which is a good Catholic term, meaning the particular features of the setting are very transferable. The six-shooter for a blaster in Star Wars, for instance, a horse for an X-wing, using Star Wars again, or a lightsaber for a samurai sword,
sure,
for a six-shooter. These are common elements as far as they're interchangeable for the type of story being told, because we talked about the Japanese movies and how those samurai movies are very much the same kind of thing. But that's the thing, Martin, the way you framed what a Western is about being the American historical, it is, although it's only 25%, actually now less than 25% of what American history is. If you look at every culture that is defined by ethnicity and or a national identity, they're going to have something similar. And I think I talked about this in our earlier show prep when we were talking about what we're going to do coming up. And that is that, every ethnicity or nationality is going to have something similar, whether it's the samurai movies or the swords and armor for the Brits, doing that kind of historical. It's a hearkening back to a time where we see bigger heroes than we see now.
Mm-hmm.
A time when
that's very well put. You're exactly right.
We see people acting out what we see as the ideal moral stances.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's a huge feature.
It's like War and Peace for Russia. I mean, that's when they shone the best, when they defeated Napoleon. That's their national story. And it's the same type of thing. It's uniquely cultural. And maybe that's what you're kind of going after here, Martin, is a Western is uniquely American because it is set uniquely American. We can steal or borrow or move, but ultimately, that's the story. The setting is what makes it the Western. Is that fair?
I think there are a lot of elements.
I would agree, yeah.
It's, because, it's rugged individualism, it's taming the frontier, it's retaining your humanity in front of huge odds, standing up for those who can't stand up for themselves. There's elements of those things in all the best Westerns.
So you're thinking it's also thematic. It's not just setting, but it's also thematic.
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
It may not be structurally, because the hero's journey is a structure that we use a lot, but that's transferable, but these other themes don't usually get transferred with it. Is that fair?
No, I think they do.
They probably do. I'm just trying to figure out.
I think in a modern setting, you'll always see the hero standing up for the little guy, the person who can't stand up for themselves.
Sure.
That's why I'm saying that the Western is the hero's journey expressed as something uniquely American, which is in the West. Whereas the hero's journey is expressed as something uniquely Japanese in the samurai stories. It's expressed as something uniquely Italian when you look at all of the Roman movies, Julius Caesar and all that,
Sword and Sandal.
The Sword and Sandal epics.
Sword and Sandal epics. It's the hero's journey is those movies set those British historicals, whether it be Thomas Becket or Man for All Seasons. Even those are granted not action oriented, but still hero's journey.
Exactly. It doesn't matter necessarily. That works.
Excalibur.
Oh,
one of our favorite movies.
That is a British Western by far. I mean, that is the
fantastic movie. John Bourbon did an amazing job. The first movie that we ever got when I got my VCR in college, the first one was Excalibur. That's the one that we watched in my dorm room when I first got that VCR that year. Amazing movie.
So guys, let me throw back
there. It's like a really big CD, only it's rectangles. It says Blu-ray. I'm even dating myself.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
4K.
At least you could get a movie at home, because before that, it's whatever they were showing on TV if you got to see it at all.
Yeah.
Yep.
Come a long way, baby.
So a Western, and on the one hand, it's no different than any other historical, except that it's set in our country. But for whatever reason, because America for so long was the center of the movie-making universe, I think we call other things ex-Westerns, spaghetti Westerns or whatever, because we were so good at making them that, when we call something like Firefly a Western set in space, well, yeah, but it is partially because they take, some of the visual elements look Western-ish, but that's also part of the, they're drawing on this great history of these Western movies and TV shows. But, pardon, I think because we did it so well and we did it first in the movies, that's why the Western is seen as something that is transported elsewhere, rather than recognizing that everybody has their own Western. We just don't call it a Western.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the Western sold well, too. Let's not forget the commercial aspect of it, because we liked it. And we exported it. Some of it is time, and some of it is location. I was thinking about this because we talked about this in the show prep. Quigley Down Under is an amazingly great Western movie. It takes place in Australia.
And there's only 2 Americans in the entire movie.
Right. So it's still a Western. It's very good.
Taming the frontier. Part of the Western too is, nothing happens in a vacuum. When movies begin. And California becomes kind of the center of the world for making movies, it's still very much in touch with its Western past. Very much in in tune with its history as the frontier, and people still remember. And some people still remember the frontier. This stuff is fresh. Well, so it's an easy way to make these stories.
Wyatt Earp, the real Wyatt Earp, dies in Los Angeles in 1929. He is a consultant for John Ford in many movies during the 20s.
Mm-hmm. And John Wayne met him.
That's exactly right. And he befriends Tom Mix in particular. And there's a great movie. It's rather obscure, actually, from the late 80s with Bruce Willis and James Garner called Sunset, which tells that story. Bruce Willis is Tom Mix in the 20s, and James Garner is the old Wyatt Earp. And it carries through his death, and Tom Mix, and it says this at the end of the movie Tombstone, Tom Mix weeps at Wyatt Earp's funeral. Because he recognizes a part of what makes him able to do what he does has just left forever. Because it's now he belongs to the ages, as they would say about Lincoln.
Yeah. So guys, I'm going to kick back a little bit more I'm going to call it rot gut, since we're doing westerns. I'm not my good rot gut bourbon here, and lay something out for you though that I think is interesting. But I'll ask you guys, what kind of rot gut have you got? I'm doing larceny rot gut. What about you all?
Well, I have what I would consider true rot gut bourbon, because the Devil's Cut, it's not quite the smooth bourbon we are used to, not the fine higher end bourbon, but it's still a good diversion.
You gotta have a set to take on Devil's Cut, don't you?
Exactly.
What about you, Francis?
So I went up to the wife and got him back so I could drink it.
I actually found I had just a little bit of that 1792 left. I thought it was all gone, but I found I had about one glass left. So I said, that can't stand. So I have to go ahead and take care of that and flush that through. It's always good, always good.
So here's something I find interesting though about westerns. Again, as this probably the longest running type of film that's out there.
1903 today.
Yeah, they're not monolithic. They're not all the same. And a couple of films that we've talked about here exemplify that. I'm going to kind of give a narrative here to weave all of these together. And maybe it's interesting only to me, but I'll see what you guys think. So, 1951, High Noon. Gary Cooper, he plays the sheriff of a small town. He's about to get married. His fiancée is Quaker, and she wants him to hang up his gun. So they're getting ready to leave to get married, and outlaws are coming to town. He's not going to be able to hang up his gun until he deals with this crisis. He keeps going to others for help because he's outnumbered and outgunned, and no one will help him. Eventually he does overcome. His Quaker wife helps him out. She ends up shooting one of the bad guys. Then they get on the train together and ride off into the sunset. The film's widely seen as an allegory for McCarthyism and blacklisting and things like that. But it's still at the same time a favorite film. Dwight Eisenhower loved it. Richard Nixon loved it. But it's this the person alone against the odds with no one to help. Mm-hmm. So we go from that, though, to 1959 and Rio Bravo. Howard Hawks and John Wayne. They hated High Noon. They thought High Noon was very un-American. They thought that was crazy. Of course people would help the sheriff when bad people are coming to town. And that's basically the story of Rio Bravo. The sheriff has help. The townspeople support him wholeheartedly. They try to help him as much as they can. He has to basically tell people, stop helping, you're in too much danger. But he has a kind of a motley set of outlaws. One's a drunk, Dean Martin. One's a injured, I guess probably an injured war veteran in Stumpy, played by Walter Houston, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Did I get that right? Walter Brennan, I'm sorry. Played by Walter Brennan. And so it all comes out good in the end. They overcome the bad guys. Again, it's somebody that owns most of the surrounding area, but his brother's a ne'er-do-well, and the brother's in jail, and they've got to try to keep him in jail till the federal marshal comes around. But he has help. Then the next movie is 1973's High Plains Drifter. Francis had mentioned this one. It's a big Clint Eastwood movie.
Mm-hmm.
And in that film, the Drifter comes to town. There are 3 gunmen on the way who want to make the town pay. And not only is the town reluctant to help, they're actually guilty. They're involved in the big conspiracy. They hired the gunman to kill the marshal that was there because he found out the mine that the town depends on is on government land. And the Drifter comes in and cleans up the town and deals with the 3 outlaws and then disappears. It's a revisionist Western. But I think that progress, those things as snapshots in time, that they reflect a particular moment in their current American history in reaching back to the past. Is that just me, or is there something to that?
No, I think there's something to that.
Absolutely.
I think just about any era of movie making is going to do that. I think in one of our very first pop culture episodes, we were talking about the Marvel superheroes and what have you. I want to say that we talked about how the comics reflected as well as formed, although not nearly as much as movies would, the cultural and the ideas of the time. So
the Zeitgeist.
The Zeitgeist, yes. Yeah, fine. If you want to use the shorthand for it, yeah.
Let's see how many German funny words we could work into this episode.
Is Sparvergnügen a German funny word?
Yeah.
I think so.
So, yeah, I think those movies are definitely going to do that. When you look at movies in any particular time frame, whether you look at it by decade or by whatever particular war was going on, I think you're going to see similar themes, or you're going to see maybe even certain themes in opposition to one another, but they're in opposition because they're diametrically opposed. So you're still kind of the same theme. Part of that's good storytelling. Part of that's also forming the culture, whether it's intentional or not, because it can reinforce certain ideas.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, life imitating art or art imitating life.
Yeah,
yes.
And there's a reason. Well, you said it very well. High Noon was meant to be this allegory against what was going on at the times. High Plains Drifter is exactly the same thing. It is definitely a nihilistic Western. It is one that has lost faith in humanity. Which is what's going on when it's made, because we're right in the middle of it. Vietnam is almost over with. And the body bags, those images are still on television at this time. And this is something showing that humanity is not worth saving in many ways. That's one of the meta themes here, because the character in High Plains Drifter is sort of kind of intended to be the avenging ghost of the murdered sheriff. That's kind of the way it's supposed to be. In fact, that's how the movie ends. Because he says, you never told me your name. And he says, you know my name. And then as he leaves, they see the formerly unmarked, now marked grave of the murdered sheriff. So that kind of shows, in many respects, divine intervention into the sins of humanity, which was very much in people's subconscious at the time.
Height of Watergate.
Well, exactly. We need divine intervention to clean this mess up. because we're not doing a good job of doing it ourselves. There's no heroes amongst us anymore. Only villains.
So to go with that, using a good example, I think Silverado is a classic 80s movie in that sense, because it is all about what's possible and overcoming great odds. It is very much a Reagan-era type of outlook.
It's a buddy movie too. A lot of people,
and it's a buddy movie. Yeah.
A lot of people coming together for the right cause and the right reasons to make things happen. So
it is. It's kind of you're absolutely right. It's a very Reagan-era movie in Silverado. Very optimistic, very hopeful at the end. Things are going to come out right. We're going to go to California. The future's very open. Everything's going to be good.
The future's so bright you're wearing shades. Dare I say that? Sorry.
What was that?
The future's so bright we're wearing shades. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Sorry,
but
that's diametrically the 80s. You don't get the reference, but
it's diametrically opposed though to a lot of the attitudes that were in movies prior to this.
Yeah.
Because the 70s was a dark time in movies.
Mm-hmm.
They even made a horror film out of a science fiction movie, Aliens, singular. So I mean, it was just very dark in general. That's one of the reasons why Star Wars stood out.
Yes, because it was against the norm at the time. And
not
in
just
respects, changed it.
Yes,
it changed.
But it was hopeful.
Changed a lot. Yes, very much so. That's George Lucas being the pioneer that he was and is. But you're exactly right. Look at how versatile this Western genre is. It can give all these different themes seamlessly, and yet every single one of these is unambiguously a Western. That's one of the things that's so fascinating by it, and that's one of the things that's so great about it. You can use this one here just about anywhere for anything you want. It's like the universal tool. It's the Swiss Army knife of genres, because if you want to tell a story, put the Western setting into it. Everybody gets that, so you don't have a whole lot of ramping up or backstory to do, because you kind of understand the tropes, and you can tell whatever story you want to tell. And that's fascinating.
Well, I think any genre should be able to do that. I think what makes the Western so good, why we go there first, is because it's in our shared history as Americans. You could tell any kind of story in any time frame. Now, the only one you can't really tell is the man versus technology, and set that, 100,000 years ago. At least, depending on the technology, you want to make it man versus,
Yeah.
It's very difficult to tell a man versus the alien monster, although I guess you could make it a dinosaur, and that's certainly been done. What was the movie Raquel Welch was in the 60s? 1 Million BC.
1 Million BC, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
But the Western, I guess, I don't want to say that the Western is not unique or special, because it is, but I think what makes it unique and special is because it's to us. I would guess that the samurai movies, which we probably are the closest to the Western genre in terms of how it's done, the outlook, the type of characters, and so on. I would guess that samurai movies hold the same kind of special place in the hearts of the Japanese as the Western does for Americans.
Absolutely. And yet they tell the same stories. So often.
Right, they tell the same stories. Sometimes literally.
That's exactly right. Yes.
We've talked about that.
But, we tell the same kind of stories in romances. We tell the same kind of stories in comedies. We tell the same kind of stories in sci-fis, in thrillers, in spy movies. The difference is, I think, in what we emphasize in each one of those, or the particulars of that setting. I think what makes the Western so well loved is that the hero relies on almost nothing except himself and his trusty 6-shooter or his rifle, but essentially it's on himself. That speaks to us with the American exceptionalism, the rugged individualism that is so much a part of American identity, or at least it was so much a part of American identity. I don't know that you could make that argument anymore for certain segments of the population, but that is what it is. And so that's, samurai movies, the same thing. The samurai relies on himself and his sword. And I think that's what makes the Western so great, is that it is truly about that particular hero, whether he's a gunfighter or the sheriff or whatever. It's, sometimes maybe he's a rancher. It's really about the person, not so much the space battles and that kind of thing. Yeah, we want to see a good shootout in a Western, but that doesn't have to happen. Almost, but it doesn't have to. It just kind of depends on the movie, and it certainly doesn't have to be tons of explosions for it to be a successful Western, like most movies today.
Yeah. The Western used to be pretty much the biggest genre going.
Right.
It was versatile. That had something to do. It was recognizable. That's for certain too. But it was a little bit of a slower thing too, because it's a non-technological, more or less, art form. It doesn't speak to that. Robert, you nailed that very well. It's not about that at all, and that's one of the reasons I think it left behind. The movie Toy Story, does a really great job in explaining just what happened. Woody, the Western toy, gets discarded as soon as Sputnik hits the air. All of a sudden, it's everything changed on that, and it took television and movies a little while to catch up, but within 15 years, it's over. That's kind of being generous. It's more like 10.
Well, yeah, I would say that the 60s. I would guess, because I don't have the numbers, but I would guess that if you look at a year-by-year count, from the late 50s on to the 70s, there are fewer Westerns made every single year.
Well, I can tell you the height was 1959. They had 26 Westerns on TV. And granted, only 3 networks. But one of the things that changed that is those were half-hour Westerns. Most of them were half-hour black and whites. When 60 came along, they started making hour-long shows. They changed their formatting, and these were just too expensive. So for 60 minutes, there's just more to that. So they started dropping away soon after that. Now, the big ones stuck around, Gunsmoke, Bonanza, but it wasn't very long before, by the time, especially by the time of 64 and 65, then all of a sudden, James Bond is around. So you have a retool of that. The Man from U.N.C.L.E. comes out. The Wild Wild West, which is an attempt to marry those two genres. And then science fiction finally ramps itself up a little bit. Star Trek is in 66, but Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea is 64. Lost in Space is 64. All 65. These things, 65. And all of a sudden, this new modern technology in space travel is displacing all this. Even though the stories are similar the same, for whatever reason, the love affair with Westerns began to wane very quickly. And that's no pun intended on John Wayne. But it wasn't. But when John Wayne does pass away, only in his last movie, 77, an era ends. I mean, Clint Eastwood's last Western, with 2 exceptions, mind you, is really the Outlaw Josie Wales in 1976. He only dabbles twice again, and those are much later and more random. He does Pale Rider in I think 84, and he does Unforgiven, his final Western, in 90, maybe 91.
91.
Yeah, and that's it. The old Westerns are gone. That's when they have to be reinvented. And that's when you get movies like Silverado, Tombstone, and let's not forget Dances with Wolves, which was a very, very, very different Western. It changed. The themes were very, very different in many ways.
It's almost a non-Western Western.
Correct, yeah. That was deliberate on Kevin Costner's part. It's one to show this, let's look at it from the other direction. And,
right.
It was, it had one Best Picture. It's an excellent movie. It really is.
Well, you don't make Westerns anymore where Indians are the bad guys.
Oh, absolutely not. No.
That's not culturally appropriate anymore.
And Dances with Wolves kind of started that. I mean, it wasn't the only one, but it kind of realized.
Well, even in Silverado in '85, they were not really. That was not the point. Cobb was the bad guy.
Right, and Exactly. You see the same thing in Pale Rider and Unforgiven and Tombstone and Wyatt Earp, which Kevin Costner also did. Open Range. He did. Costner was probably one of the last guys that really liked doing westerns.
Yeah.
And after that, not so much. We were talking in the show prep. You might get one a year, but they're usually one-offs. And it's not to say that there haven't been some good ones out there. There's also been some steaming piles of crapola on this too. You had one that you mentioned, Martin. Which was the one that you said you wouldn't see under any circumstances? That was a remake of something.
I think it's the remake of the Magnificent Seven that was out recently.
That's the one that you talked about. That's right.
That's just one you don't mess with. The Magnificent Seven, Yul Brynner, Charles Bronson,
Steve McQueen, Robert Vaughn,
Eli Wallach, Robert Vaughn.
But what was the movie? The remake. What was it called?
Magnificent Seven.
The Magnificent Seven.
Oh, they actually
Yeah.
It
shows you didn't even notice it. It slipped past so fast.
Chris Pratt.
Well, I never saw it.
Denzel.
I had forgotten that they'd even done that. Yes.
Yeah. The only really new westerns that you will find are some really weird changed ones, like Django Unchained with Tarantino. The Hateful Eight with Tarantino. Those aren't really. They're using the Western genre, but it subverts a lot of that. It's meant to kind of undo some of that worship.
Tarantino's hyper-violent style.
Right.
Which I mean, I like
the genre
Tarantino movies, but
yeah.
Believe
it or not, Leonardo DiCaprio did the movie The Revenant, which actually won. I don't remember the awards that it won, but it was actually fairly significant. It's a Western. It really is. It doesn't come across that way because it doesn't have the familiar tropes and all that, but the setting and the time, it's all that. So they are still out there from time to time, as you say, but they're not what they once were. In fact, the classic Western, it's gone forever. You'll never see that.
So the classic Western is really pretty tame by today's standards.
Oh, very much so. Yes, absolutely. We left it behind. We couldn't. It's boring for us now.
There's not enough
for some of us, but that's it.
And partially that's I kid about the not enough explosion, but that's part of it. I think I talked about this in our show prep. Everything needs to be larger than life now. It's hard to do larger than life in a Western. And we made the joke about it, Cowboys and Aliens.
That's one. And it was reviled. I liked it. I'll watch anything Daniel Craig does. It was fun. It was exactly right.
It was stupid, but it was fun.
That's correct. And sometimes you can get away with all that. Basically, Michael Bay has done us no favors, but because he's taken our short attention span and given us all these flashy lights, and that's all we can go with anymore. And it's a shame we've lost some really good storytelling opportunities within some fertile ground. Perhaps it was overplowed at one time. Doesn't mean it can't come back.
Yeah, and the thing is that if we go back to what truly makes a Western great, being the hero's journey, we've got great examples of that in lots of things. I absolutely, you guys know I'm a huge Marvel guy, both comics and movies, obviously. I think that the hero's journey is well done throughout all 22 Marvel movies that have been released to date.
There's both the macro versions and the micro versions and the macro, because Tony Stark's story over all those movies is the hero's journey. That's exactly it. As is Steve Rogers as well. You might make some argument there are others in there too, and each movie kind of has its own versions of it.
There certainly are, but those are the big two.
Those are the big two. That's right.
And having everything needing to be larger than life, it's really difficult to use a period setting to do that. Certainly outside of certain things. You can't. I'm just having a hard time thinking of how you would to get outside of Independence, a Western done that is a serious film. That would. Obviously it can be done, but it's just because it's so uniquely different compared to what else is being made. It's one of the reasons why you don't see them that often anymore.
Well, yeah.
But it's like if you look at a lot of the movies made in the 30s, the comedies are kind of farces. There's a lot of gangster movies. Some of those are pretty tame by today's standards, but there's some that are just simple human interest kind of movies that are seen as kind of boring, that would almost certainly never be made by a major studio anymore because there's not a lot of action.
Yeah, you can't make an epic with a general rule in this genre because you bump up against history too much. You cannot have the world about to end in a Western. Not really. I mean, Cowboys and Aliens, you might make that. That was a stretch of a little bit of one, but you're right. They're mostly small human interest stories.
Yeah, which again is with Will Smith and Kevin Kline.
The Wild
similar
Wild
kind
West.
of Wild West. Yes, sorry, that's what I meant. Yes, I think that because the stakes tend to be more personal, if they're going to do that kind of story, they're just not going to use a Western setting for it because it's not as relatable for modern audiences.
Totally agreed. That was one that failed because you had great actors and actresses in that movie, and you took it. Which one? The Wawa Wild West.
Oh,
and you took a proven concept that worked on television. Robert Conrad did a fantastic job with Ross Martin in it, but it didn't translate. It was not.
Well, it was filmed as a comedy.
Yes, too campy.
Yeah, Wild Wild West is not a comedy from the television series. Now you can do comedy. Paleface, Bob Hope.
Blazing Saddles.
Blazing Saddles, yes.
Blazing Saddles.
Silverado has plenty of comedic moments.
Sure.
Well, so does Tombstone for all of its seriousness.
Well, yeah, it's got its few moments. Val Kilmer, he brings out quite a few zingers there at different times.
Why can't you not wear a bustle? How lewd.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think that it's just not the preferred vehicle for the aspects that it could be good at otherwise. And that's probably that's more of just the taste of the populace. But these things come and go. It's like if you look at television, you will see certain kinds of shows be popular all at once. Hospital shows, cop shows, uniformed cop shows, detective cop shows, spy shows, procedural shows like NCIS and CSI. Those are all kinds of things that they tend to get popular at the same time. Some of them have a really long life. NCIS is in its 17th season, for God's sake, which I never would have expected. And so, it's just who knows if the Western will ever make that kind of return? Because again, it does take more money to do a Western because of the sets and the costumes. And you need horses, and you need exteriors, far more than you do in a lot of other shows.
Right.
And, certain things you can do with CGI, but not everything.
Yeah.
And if you're going to do a heavy CGI show, it's got to be damn big to be able to be done.
Yeah, you don't get very many Game of Thrones that you can.
Well, and look how many episodes of Game of Thrones you get in a season. Yeah,
because it was so bloody expensive. Yeah, that's why the last two seasons were curtailed because it was so expensive to make what they made. They couldn't lengthen the story, which was one of the criticism on it. It was far too compressed.
Well, and they were kind of hoping that George R.R. Martin would actually finish the damn books before they got to the end of the movie.
Well, that's kind of like those guardrails on the side of the bridge. That's a comforting thought, but you don't ever expect to have to use them.
That's right.
He's been locked in his house now since March. He ought to have made some progress on that last book.
He said he was, well, it's not the last. It's second to the last. Winds of Winter. He's still got another one after this, assuming he doesn't lengthen it anyway. Hope springs eternal, but I don't see it happening. Every year they talk about, will he do it? Will he won't? Will he not? It's,
he's actually, I think, got a longer hiatus between his this one, whatever it will be published in his last book, than he did. I think it was between the third and fourth, or the fourth and the fifth.
Fourth and fifth is the big one.
Fourth and fifth.
A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons.
Yeah, and he wrote himself into a corner and didn't know what to do.
That's correct. And
so, listeners, for those of you who are aspiring writers, this is what happens when you're a pantser and not a plotter.
Amen to that. Absolutely. That you're just going to kind of wing it.
Nothing wrong with a little pantsing now and then, writing by the seat of your pants. but I prefer a mix. I'd like to know where I'm going, and then a little bit of riding by the seat of my pants to get there. But,
well, exactly. That's one of the complaints. Not to go down a rabbit hole, but the Battlestar Galactica TV series, the recent one that Ron Moore did so well. Problem is, they just kind of went wild with whatever they wanted to do, and they said, okay, let's wrap this up. Oh, we've got these 50,000 dangling plot lines that are conflicting with each other. What are we going to do? What do you mean you made a Cylon pregnant? Oh, you are a Cylon. Oh, what are we going to do now? Oh, well, the baby's got to die because we're going to change the story. There can only be one Cylon hybrid, and on and on and on and on.
Yeah. Oh, I got one better for you. Lost is the best example of that.
Oh, absolutely it is. That's correct. Okay, let's wrap this up, gentlemen. Now what we do? Let's make it all a dream. You've been dead the whole time. Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Talk about a cheat. That one definitely.
The best thing I ever saw, one of the best things I ever saw on the internet was a YouTube video, and it was the real ending to Lost. And you remember Lost opened up with what the main character, Jack, waking up in the jungle and this dog running by. I think the dog's name was Vincent. And the end of the show should have ended with whatever the last scene was in Lost, and then you cut to the dog Vincent sleeping on the floor. You know how dogs shake when they're dreaming?
Yeah.
Basically, it was the dog's dream. The entire show was the dog's dream.
The dog's dream.
Well, you think they would have learned with Bobby Ewing and that whole season of Dallas that they made, where they killed him, that it was all a dream. That's what started all this. Nobody ever dared to do that before. But because Patrick Duffy decided, well, maybe I would like the more money you're going to pay me, you've got to get that corner that you've written yourself in there out of there, so you just write it all off as a dream. And it's been sabotaging stories ever since because somebody actually dared to do it.
I don't know how that relates to Westerns, but...
Well, we've been really good. We haven't gone down rabbit holes much lately. We've actually stayed on topic.
We did the last episode with John Wayne. It was kind of related, but we kind of went down some rabbit holes. So.
Well, that's my fault. I'm the captain. I shouldn't have let you go down the rabbit hole, but I like hearing your story about Lost.
Yeah,
I like hearing that story.
There was a good progression from the Westerns to the rabbit holes we got to, so,
Yeah. So, guys, that's, the Western, the uniquely American, and when it's at its best, it's about, defending your town from the bully.
Yeah.
And
justice, yes.
Seeking justice. And those are some great, great films. And again, they do tend to be a reflection of their time. And Robert, I loved how you capped my list of 3 with one more in Silverado as a return to that. Yeah, sure, of course the town's on your side. Let's get rid of the bully in Cobb. So that's terrific stuff. But I think I'm about to wrap up here. Take my last swig of my rot gut. Francis, what's on tap for next time?
We are back to history, and you know what that means. It's going to be July. This is kind of the crescendo for the moment. Now, it's not the final act, but it's one of the big dog daddies of our Civil War discussion. We haven't done a what if in a while, and we are at some of our very best when we do those. We're going to do our Gettysburg episode, which is the high water mark of the Confederacy, but we're going to do it slightly different. We're going to do similar to what we did with Robert Kennedy. We're going to postulate, what if Stonewall Jackson is present at Gettysburg? And we make a few assumptions with this. You have to do a good what if, but we're going to explore this. And what if he's there on the first day? What if he's there on the second? What if he's there on the third? And pretty much as it would have rolled out, and then what happens? It's going to be a fascinating discovery. You're going to love it.
Thanks for being with us here every week at Snakes and Otters, a pointless discussion of eternal questions. Be sure to spread the word on your social media accounts. Follow us and retweet us. We are on Instagram and on Twitter at Snakes and Otters.
Let your friends know that they can find us on Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, and on YouTube. Just search Snakes and Otters Podcast to find us, and please remember to leave us your comments and reviews. It helps people find us.
And you can always send us an email at snakesandotterspodcast@gmail.com.
I'm Martin.
I'm Robert.
And I'm Francis. Catch us next week. Same snake time, same otter channel.